From Souris, Moose Mountain.
Mr. Speaker, recently the member for Yorkton Melville and I met with 160 members of the Shishi Cottage Owners Association and the Grenfell Beach Association. We were there to listen to their concerns about a 9-year process affecting their leases with Her Majesty the Queen in right of Canada. Many of these 324 leaseholders and their families have invested their life savings into the development of their future, and their leases have been increased 600 to 700%. They are consistently told the issue is before the courts and there's nothing the government can or will do for them. Decisions made by the court are appealed, remedial resolution meetings are not kept or not made. They are frustrated at every step. In fact, some leases will expire this year. With no written leases presented, how can they determine their future? Like the pipeline, this government continues to kick this process down the road. The government is taking no action to help resolve this issue. The cottages have not missed payments, and they are reasonable people asking to be treated fairly. It is time for the government to step up and do the right thing.
Member for Winnipeg South.
Mr. Speaker, last week I had the pleasure to travel to Washington, D.C. to celebrate 20 years of leadership by Promundo, a global leader in promoting gender justice and preventing violence by engaging men and boys in partnership with women and girls. I was particularly honored to accept the Future of Manhood Award on behalf of our Prime Minister. L'égalité entre les sexes.
Our government puts gender equality at the heart of decision-making, with new investments to prevent and address gender-based violence and develop an engagement strategy for men and boys that promotes equality.
Mr. Speaker, we simply cannot move forward when half of us are held back. And I'm proud, Mr. Speaker, that our Prime Minister is being recognized for his strong global leadership on gender equality. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear.
The member for Abitibi-Témiscamingue.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to announce that a parliamentary group has been set up by senators and MPs from all parties to fight modern slavery and human trafficking. I will have the privilege of co-chairing this group alongside the members for Winnipeg Centre and to Peace River Westlock, as well as Senator Christmas. We want to promote a nonpartisan approach because for us the issue is far too important to be bogged down in partisan squabbles. The group is supported by the director of the Centre for International Justice and Human Rights at UBC, Ms. Nicole Barrett, who is member of the national group to end trafficking in women and girls in Canada. Even in our country, some 90% of victims are women exploited above all for sexual purposes. These women are our mothers, our daughters, our sisters, our neighbors, and they deserve our help. I'd like to invite all members in this House to join our group to find solutions to end once and for all these affronts to human rights that occur here in Canada as well.
For St. John Rothsay.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today with a heavy heart, but also one full of pride for the amazing outpouring of community support in response for the historic flooding afflicting the residents of my riding, St. John Rothsay, and all of New Brunswick. There are so many unsung heroes. Our first responders, St. John Energy, our mayors, Don Darling and Nancy Grant, Premier Brian Gallant, and so many others. This is already a record-breaking flood, and thousands of St. John Rothsay residents whose homes have never been at serious risk of flooding in the past are now bearing the brunt of catastrophic flood damage. For me, this flood is personal. One of my best friends, Terry Ferguson, lives at Ground Zero. The effort to save his home is inspiring. People like Kevin Ferguson, Larry Dunlop, Jerry Foley, Sean Ferguson, Mike Gray, Sean Crawford, Chris Ferguson, and so many others have answered the call for help. I urge everyone in my riding to listen closely for and heed advisories issued by EMO officials in the region. Let's stand together, be resilient, and show compassion. I'll be home to help tonight. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Saskatchewan University.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to take a few moments and speak about an energetic woman named Christina Lee Fast. Christina has a good sense of humor. She likes to seek out the sense of humor in others. Being a sociable person, she has started a young adults group in her church, and that group has grown in time. has grown in time. Christina likes to work out at her local gym. Naturally, her love of fitness led her to become an Olympic athlete in the Special Olympics. Christina loves her life, and the people in her life love her. But not all people in Canada love or even value women like Christina. Why? Because Christina has Down syndrome. Once diagnosed with Down syndrome in the womb, 90% of Down syndrome children in Canada are aborted. Instead of being valued and accepted, sadly they are viewed as a burden to be avoided. Canadians with Down syndrome, Canadians like Christina, make Canada a wonderful place. We should all be proud of their contributions.
The Honourable Member for Vaudreuil-Soulanges. Mr. Speaker, throughout Vaudreuil-Soulanges and throughout the year, there are many activities for families, young people, and seniors in our region. These activities are wonderful, and one of the most exciting is the Des Cèdres River Tour. As part of this activity, a guide will take you on a journey through our history, help you discover the Soulanges Canal, the Cajot, the Prince Rapids ship, and the natural beauty of our region. This river adventure will give you a rare opportunity to see, feel, and experience Vaudreuil-Soulanges as never before. Mr. Speaker, I encourage everyone in Vaudreuil-Soulanges to join me, the Mayor of the Des Cèdres municipality, Mr. Raymond Larouche, and the Municipal Council to participate in the Des Cèdres River Tour.
Honourable Member for London West.
Mr. Speaker, today I rise to acknowledge Beverly Thompson, a London West resident and recipient of the Governor-General's Sovereign Medal for Volunteers. As an official Canadian honour, the Medal for Volunteers recognizes the exceptional volunteer achievements of Canadians from across the country. Beverly Thompson has spent many years helping those suffering from alcohol and drug addiction. She was a founding member of the Westover Treatment Centre in Thamesville and executive director of St. Stephen's, a recovery home for men in London. After decades of devotion to get local and affordable treatment programs in place for people battling alcohol and drug dependency, Bev Thompson is still championing addiction awareness today. Thank you, Beverly, for the lives that you have touched and for all that you have done for Southwestern Ontario. Your selflessness and dedication to service is truly an inspiration. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, April 18th is a date that will remain forever etched in our minds, and more specifically in the minds of people from Charlebourg. The unthinkable occurred. A little girl, Rosalie Gagnon, 2 years of age, was found dead, assassinated, and left in a garbage bin. This little girl suffered tremendously. As a society, it's our duty to protect the most vulnerable members, our seniors and our children. Through this tragic situation, Rosalie brought the community together, Canada and Quebec combined. Everyone came together to offer her a final send-off. Over the past few weeks, a march took place. Balloons were released in Charlebourg in memory of little Rosalie. The funeral will be held tomorrow at the St. Rodrigue Church, and I will attend to honor this little angel. I'm a father. Our children are vulnerable. It's our duty to care for them. They represent our future. Goodbye, Rosalie.
The Honourable Member for Thunder Bay, Rainy River.
Mr. Speaker, today a group of students from Franklin Cromarty High School in Thunder Bay are visiting Parliament Hill. DFC is a unique school that was established by the parents and elders in the Anishinaabe-Aski Nation territory of northwestern Ontario and serves youth from many different nations, First Nations, throughout northwestern Ontario. At Dennis Franklin Cromarty, students have the unique opportunity of attending a First Nation high school within the city of Thunder Bay. The mission of DFC is to ensure students develop a strong sense of identity in the distinct language, culture, and traditions of their communities, while also achieving academic excellence. I want to welcome the students here today, and to them I say miigwech for the work they do.
The Honourable Member for Cloverdale, Langley City.
Mr. Speaker, for anyone who has ever dreamt of starting their own business, they'll want to hear this. The Downtown Langley Business Association is inviting aspiring entrepreneurs across BC to enter a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to win a prize valued at over $100,000 to help them launch the retail business of their dreams in beautiful downtown Langley. The grand prize winner will receive an incredible prize package that includes 6 months free rent, a new retail space, full branding and marketing support, legal and accounting support, and much, much more. Applications are open for one more week and close on May 11th. Interested applicants can visit downtownlangley.com for more information. And while I have you, Mr. Speaker, the Cloverdale Rodeo is coming up from May 18th to 21st. We'll have cowboys and cowgirls competing in a variety of events, the area's largest midway, axe-throwing competitions, rib fest, freestyle skateboarding, and so much more. You won't want to miss it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Nose Hill.
Albertans are humble, hard-working people. They carry pride that comes from self-reliance, of caring for their community, and for standing for what they believe in. This Liberal government hasn't been kind to my province. Frankly, neither has their current provincial government. But here's the thing. Albertans don't take a punch and stay on the ground. They get up and they punch back. This is why over 2,600 Albertans, an unprecedented number, are gathering this weekend in Red Deer to plan to take their future back. Canadians from around the country congratulate members of the United Conservative Party on the eve of their founding annual general meeting. Their grassroots movement has caught fire across the province and mobilized tens of thousands of people to fight for their right to a prosperous future. To my former colleague Jason Kenney, thank you for what you've done to unite the people of Alberta in this movement. The people of Alberta are strong and they are free. What's happening in Red Deer this weekend will ensure they stay that way. Get her done, Alberta.
The Honourable Member for Vancouver Quadra.
Mr. Speaker, on April 9th, UBC and its partners celebrated the opening of the new Indian Residential School History and Dialogue Centre in my riding of Vancouver Quadra. UBC President Santa Ono took this opportunity to apologize for the university's part in that harmful system. Musqueam First Nation assisted this project of truth-sharing, and local elders were present to talk about the long-term impacts of residential schools. The centre provides a place for public education and dialogue on this dark chapter of our history to ensure that the experiences, policies, and abuse will never be forgotten. Our government's comprehensive approach to Indigenous reconciliation is only a small part of our national journey. I commend President Ono and thank the Indian Residential School History and Dialogue Centre Director Link Kessler for his years of championing this project and making it a reality. And finally, thank you to the Musqueam First Nation for inspiring us with your experience and wise counsel.
The Honourable Member for Jonquière. Mr. Speaker, today I want to tell you about a unique service offered in Quebec to the people of Jonquière. An inspiring success story, Jonquière Medic. Since 1982, this organization has offered services for free in-home medical consultations, and to accomplish that, currently 6 doctors are available to meet the needs of the community. Jonquière Medic has proven itself by making it possible to prevent the unnecessary transportation of patients by providing them with the medical treatment they need in their homes. And where does the funding for this organization come from? A service that benefits thousands of people who don't have access to an attending physician? Well, it comes from the community, Mr. Speaker. Annual fundraising events are held and bring in donations from corporations and individuals whose generosity increases each year. I want to salute the extraordinary work by the entire team at Jonquière Medic.
Honourable Member for Carleton.
The Canadian Association for Supportive Employment for the last 20 years has been helping people with disabilities get and keep great jobs. But Annette Burrows, the president of the association, is warning of an obstacle, and I quote, "We strive for employment equality, and when people are faced with any disincentive to be able to contribute to society in a meaningful way through employment, those disincentives need to be addressed and eliminated," end quote. She's referring to the clawbacks and taxes that often mean people with disabilities are worse off when they work, add hours, or get a raise. My bill, the Opportunity for Workers with Disabilities Act, would require governments ensure that people can always get ahead through their own hard work, and I'm happy to announce that Ms. Burrows and her association have endorsed that bill and said, and I quote, "The Opportunity Act would eliminate the disincentive to work due to excess clawbacks on disabled workers. I support its principles. I encourage all members of the House to do the same. Let's pass this bill and bring justice for hardworking Canadians.
Honourable member for Egmont.
Mr. Speaker, this past week the spring lobster fishery in Prince Edward Island opened, and this also marks the time of year when farmers begin cultivating their land. I would like to take this opportunity to wish all farmers and fishers a safe and productive season and remind Canadians that the hard work of these people is why Canada has a strong reputation for the safest, most abundant food in the world. I would also like to take a moment to recognize one farmer from my riding, Leo Handerhan, who harvested his first blueberries on the family farm near Tignish in 1966, and despite acknowledging that his first crop wasn't much, he persevered, helping re-establish the crop in West Prince. He was recently given the Pioneer Award by the Wild Blueberry Growers Association, which recognizes individuals who have helped build and grow their industry. A well-deserved honor. Congratulations, Leo Handerhan.
Questions orales, oral questions. The Honourable Opposition House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, for over a year we've been asking these Liberals about how much their carbon tax will cost Canadians, and for over a year they've been covering up the cost and refusing to answer. But yesterday the Minister of Finance said he's going to tell us in the fall, and he blames the provinces for this cover-up. The fact is, Mr. Speaker, the Finance Minister knows exactly what the carbon tax will cost. He's given us the report, but he's blacked out the numbers. These Liberals need to tell Canadians how much will their carbon tax cost everyday Canadian families.
Honourable Minister of Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was very pleased this week that we released a report, and what did it show? Carbon pricing works. Why? Because it reduces emissions at the lowest cost while also growing the economy. Provinces, 80% of Canadians live in a province where there's a price on pollution. There is no federal price on pollution. You can go look at British Columbia. British Columbia has been able to reduce its emissions while growing its economy. But what Canadians really want to know is what would the Conservatives do to tackle climate change?
Honourable Opposition House Leader.
Well, Mr. Speaker, high gas prices are not only a burden for Canadian families, but they are a job-killing expense for farmers, fishermen and business owners. My colleague Rob Moore from New Brunswick has been hearing from fishermen from right across Atlantic Canada. They're really angry about what this government has already done to the lobster and snow crab industries, and now they're very worried about the federal carbon tax and that they won't be able to afford fuel for their fishing vessels. Just how much is this Liberal carbon tax going to cost the good people of New Brunswick? Hear, hear.
Honourable Minister of Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was pleased that I was talking to the Premier of New Brunswick. Provinces across the country understand that we need to put a price on pollution, that we need to have a serious plan to tackle climate change. Provinces are well within their rights to establish their own plan, as 80% of Canadians already live where there's a price: Ontario, Quebec, Alberta, BC, and the provinces can determine what to do with the revenues. They can return the revenues to individuals, to businesses. They can decide they're going to invest in energy efficiency. We think that that's the best way, because that's the way we can actually tackle climate change, work together, and grow our economy.
Honourable Opposition House Leader.
These elitist Liberals are completely out of touch with everyday Canadians. In rural areas and in provinces like New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, driving a vehicle is a necessity. Not using fuel is not an option. In some cases, the closest grocery store, hospital, or bank could be 50 kilometres or more away. Now, jet-setting millionaires like the Prime Minister can afford $1.81 a litre gas prices, but most Canadians can't afford that. So again, when will the Liberals tell us how much their carbon tax is going to cost everyday Canadians?
Honourable Minister of Environment.
I would note that in the past election, every single riding in Atlantic Canada was won by Liberals. I guess that was the message that was missed by the Conservatives. They did nothing. But you know what? The other thing that the Conservatives don't realize, that climate change is real. It's not an elitist view that it's having an impact on farmers. It's having an impact on fishers. It's having an impact on everyone, that we need to take smart, practical measures to tackle climate change. That is exactly what we're doing.
L'honorable député de Lévis-Lotbinière.
The Honourable Member for Lévis-Lotbinière. Mr. Speaker, According to the Parliamentary Budget Officer's report, the carbon tax will have a negative impact on the Canadian economy. A $10 billion impact by 2022. That is a lot of money for Canadian families. How much money is that for families that will be affected by the carbon tax, which is sexist, over the course of a year? Minister of the Environment. Mr. Speaker, I'm very surprised to hear them say that they are afraid of sexism because they closed 12 of 16 status of women offices. We know that we have to act on climate change. We have a plan. What Canadians are asking is, what's the Conservative plan? The Honourable Member for Lévis-Lotbinière. Mr. Speaker, the sexist carbon tax is only going to be used to pay for Liberals' deficits caused by their bad management. The most vulnerable people will be the ones affected. On this side of the House, we respect the money of Canadians. Why does the Liberal government believe that Canadians' money belongs to them by imposing new taxes to pay their own out-of-control expenditures? The Honourable Minister of the Environment. No matter how loud he yells, it's not going to change anything. I will explain how this is going to work. 90% of Canadians who pay a cost on coal, and the money goes back to the provinces. There are 4 provinces that put a price on carbon, and they have the highest growth in the country. We have to tackle climate change. I ask again, what is your plan for tackling climate change?
I almost always enjoy hearing the voice of the member for Souris Moose Mountain. I'd ask him not to yell out when someone else has the floor and to wait until he has the floor. The member for Victoria.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 3 weeks ago, just outside these doors, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, well, he suggested the federal government, BC, Alberta, and Indigenous leaders refer the jurisdictional issues concerning Kinder Morgan to the Supreme Court of Canada. Well, the Liberal government scoffed. They said it was a ridiculous proposal. Their jurisdiction was clear and beyond dispute. Now they've decided to join in the reference case to the BC Court of Appeal. Oops, if it was such a ridiculous idea then, why is it such a good idea now?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are intervening in the reference question filed by BC. We are confident in our jurisdiction and will intervene to defend the national interest. The TMX project is a vital strategic interest to Canada, and it will be built. Our government has initiated formal financial discussions with Kinder Morgan, the result of which will be to remove uncertainty overhanging the project. We are also actively pursuing legislative options that will assert and reinforce the federal jurisdiction in this matter, which we know we clearly have. Hundreds of thousands of hardworking Canadians depend on this project being built. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Jonquière. Mr. Speaker, almost a month ago, the NDP proposed working with British Columbia, Alberta, and Indigenous communities on a reference to the Supreme Court about Kinder Morgan. The Liberals thought it was ridiculous, but yesterday we found out that they're going to intervene in legal proceedings launched by the government of British Columbia. Not only are they slowing the process down, but they continue to ignore that there's a faster solution. What's the government waiting for to send this file to the Supreme Court? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
We are intervening in the reference question filed by BC. We are doing so because we are confident in our jurisdiction, and we will intervene to defend what is in the national interest. The TMX project is a vital strategic interest to Canada, and it will be built. We are also actively pursuing legislative options that will assert and reinforce the federal jurisdiction in this matter, which we know we clearly have. Our government has also initiated formal financial discussions with Kinder Morgan, the result of which will be to remove uncertainty overhanging this project. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Jonquière. Mr. Speaker, another file, another disagreement with the provinces. Health transfers, Kinder Morgan, price of carbon, taxing cannabis, taxing products online, reopening the Constitution, and I could go on. This time, we're likely to end up in court regarding the authorization to grow cannabis at home. We're far from the leadership and cooperative federalism we had been promised. Will the government stop ignoring the concerns of provinces and finally work with them? The Honourable Minister of Health. The current approach to cannabis isn't working. It allows criminals to profit from it and hasn't kept cannabis out of the hands of our children. We respect the work that the Senate does, and we are looking forward to reviewing the report that is currently being worked on. The government is confident that C-45 will be passed in June. Our government has taken steps to respond to communities, including Indigenous communities.
So much for cooperative federalism in sunny ways, Mr. Speaker. Cooperative federalism, well, that means actually working with the provinces, not simply telling them this is the way things are. Now provinces are raising concerns about home cultivation of marijuana, but the Prime Minister simply says, no way, we're going ahead regardless of your concerns. When did the Liberals decide to abandon cooperative federalism?
Exactly. Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, the approach to cannabis does not work. It has allowed criminals and organized crime to profit while failing to keep cannabis out of the hands of youth. We respect the work that the Senate has been doing, and we look forward to reviewing the recommendations brought forward by the Social Committee. Our government is confident that Bill C-45 can be adopted later this June. Our government has taken important steps to address specific interests expressed by Indigenous communities and other groups. We will continue to collaborate with provinces and territories to ensure that a reasonable transition towards the legal market is brought forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Battleford's Lloydminster.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is ignoring the basic economic reality that his carbon tax unfairly punishes farmers and rural communities. He refuses to accept Saskatchewan's own climate change strategy and continues to threaten my province. Yet, at the same time, he refuses to come clean about the actual cost of his carbon tax on Canadians. If the Prime Minister can't answer this basic question about his carbon tax, will the Public Safety Minister from Saskatchewan answer this question?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the last election, we campaigned on improving the economy and protecting the environment. We have protecting the environment, and we have the best growth in the G7. We have also not taken science money out of agriculture like the previous Harper government did. We have added $100 million to the science budget in agriculture. We will and will continue, we have and will continue to support the agricultural sector in this country, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Saskatoon Grasswood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Liberal carbon tax will have a negative impact on Saskatchewan's export, along with their energy industry's competitiveness. This will be one of the largest national tax increases in Canadian history, and that's why my province is taking it to the Supreme Court. This tax affects everyone, every man, woman, and child in my province. Analysis has been done. The Liberals know the answer, yet they continue to cover it up. So why won't the Public Safety Minister from my province of Saskatchewan come clean and give us the numbers?
Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, I think the honourable gentleman missed my speech last year where I described some of these issues in considerable detail before the Canadian Club in a meeting in Regina. The fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, the province of Saskatchewan has the full option to design a carbon pricing system of its own, including the exemption of farm fuel, including the exemption of small oil and gas companies, if they would choose to do so. If they do not choose to do so, Mr. Speaker, the fallback position will come into effect, but the first right.
The Honourable Member for Souris Moose Mountain.
Mr. Speaker, during the debate on the carbon tax, the Minister of the Environment stated, carbon capture and storage is a solution that will benefit everyone. This technology has existed for years at the Boundary Dam Power Station, whose carbon capture technology has removed over 2 million tons of CO2 from the atmosphere. The Minister sings the virtues of this innovative, green, emissions-cutting technology, yet is forcing job-killing carbon tax on the people of Saskatchewan. Why isn't the only minister from Saskatchewan, the Public Safety Minister, not championing Saskatchewan's clean energy initiatives.
Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Jeepers, Mr. Speaker, he missed the speech too. It specifically dealt with carbon capture and sequestration. And I'm pleased to tell him, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to tell him that I was the minister in the Government of Canada 20 years ago that put the initial funding into carbon capture and sequestration in Saskatchewan.
Order. The Honourable Member for Yorkton Melville.
He should let his Environment Minister know that. Mr. Speaker, the carbon tax is already killing jobs and hurting families in Alberta and British Columbia. Saskatchewan is taking this Liberal Prime Minister and his greedy government to court to stop this punitive tax. In court, the Liberal carbon tax cover-up will be exposed. Why wait until Saskatchewan wins? Will the Minister of the Environment come clean today and reveal the cost of the federal carbon tax on Saskatchewan families? No, she won't. How about the Public Safety Minister, who was elected to represent the beautiful, cutting-edge, environmentally efficient province of Saskatchewan?
The Honourable Minister of Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me be clear. I was actually with Saskatchewan Technology, with carbon capture and storage in China, so that I could help promote this technology. But let me tell you another thing, but it's going to be hard. You're going to have to stop shouting and listen. That carbon capture and storage is only economic if you put a price on pollution, because people will choose that technology. It is about choice. You know what? There are conservatives that are very happy to explain to you about what a price on pollution works. There are many of them, including the former advisor to Stephen Harper. And I could go, well, maybe you should listen to people that understand economics.
Order. On the one hand, I'd ask members to listen and to not be interrupting when someone else has the floor. On the other, I'd ask the Honourable Minister to remember to address her comments to the Chair. The Honourable Member for North Okanagan, Shuswap.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister lectured Canadians the other day that they need to make better choices and change their behaviour. Well, that behaviour change shouldn't mean missing a health appointment because you can't afford the gas to get there. But that's the choice that some British Columbians are being forced to make with the Prime Minister's punitive carbon taxes. Does the Prime Minister believe that Canadians should be forced to make the choice between driving to a health appointment or paying for groceries?
The Honourable Minister of Environment.
Mr. Speaker, of course we care about the cost of living for Canadians. Of course we care about growing the economy. Of course we care about tackling climate change. That is why we've got a serious, credible plan with low-cost measures to make sure that we tackle climate change. Once again, all I want to know, and all Canadians want to know, is what would you ever do to tackle climate change, and do you actually believe it's real?
The Honourable Member for Central Okanagan, Similkameen Nicola.
This government says they care, Mr. Speaker, but you know, actions speak louder than words. In British Columbia this week, the Prime Minister lectured Canadians that they need to make better choices. Now, what he considers better choices, Mr. Speaker, is devastating to my province. What's worse is they won't tell us, Canadians or their representatives in this place, how much it will cost. We're already starting to see the cost, with gas at $1.60 a litre, Mr. Speaker. And of course, the Prime Minister and his cabinet won't feel the effects of everyday families are feeling because they get paid, everything is paid for. When will they come clean, Mr. Speaker, and tell Canadians what their carbon tax will cost them?
Honourable Minister of Environment.
Mr. Speaker, we have been clear with Canadians. We released a study this week, and what does it show? It shows that putting a price on pollution works. Why does it work? Because it creates incentives for people to choose low-cost options. It creates incentives to choose innovation, creates incentives to reduce emissions and tackle climate change. But once again, we're just going to continue asking, what is the Conservative plan to tackle climate change, and do they believe it's real?
L'Honorable Député de Sherbrooke.
The Honourable Member for Sherbrooke. 2 years ago, we found out that the CRA wrote up an amnesty letter to rich clients for KPMG. The Minister for Revenue indicated that justice would be done, that no one is above the law. Since then, nothing. No criminal charges against KPMG or its clients. But when it's time to attack single moms who depend on the Canada Child Benefit, she's quick to ask, or quick to act, rather. Why is she so slow when it comes time to prosecute real fraudsters like KPMG and its clients?
Revenue.
Mr. Speaker, cracking down on tax evasion, especially offshore, is a priority for our government. Budget 2018 invests almost $100 million into the CRA, in addition to nearly $1 billion in the last two budgets to allow us to go even further in this fight. The budget also includes legislative changes that will close tax loopholes used by multinationals. We have fully adopted the international standard for the automatic exchange of information with our OECD partners, and starting this year, Mr. Speaker, we will have access to even more data from other jurisdictions, which will enable us to fight tax evasion even more effectively. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Longueuil-Saint-Hubert. The Quebec Union of Municipalities is seeing the damage caused by federal inaction when it comes to taxing web giants. Again this week, the Minister of Finance got mixed up. We asked about GST, and he answered by talking about corporate taxes. This is concerning. People and businesses here are struggling, and the government continues to give preferential treatment to multinationals. Everyone should pay their fair share. That's just good common sense. Look, is this like the pot issue? Do the Liberals have little buddies to protect? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To answer the question, no, we have no friends to protect. Our approach is careful and responsible. We want an approach to taxing web giants that will preserve the economy, will encourage innovation, and making sure that everything is fair at the same time. That's why the Minister of Finance is working with his OECD partners to make sure that Canada takes an approach that is concerted at an international level.
In May 2016, at a G7 ministers meeting, the Environment Minister, according to an article in the Globe and Mail, quote, advocated for greater recognition of the gender dimension to climate. However, a subsequent gender-based analysis on the Prime Minister's carbon tax suggested that it could have a lopsided negative impact for different genders. Why is the Prime Minister not taking his own minister's advice and refusing to recognize the gender dimension to the carbon tax?
The Minister of Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very pleased that the member opposite has raised the importance of doing gender-based analysis. We are committed to doing that, and in the second annex to the release that we put out to the report we put out this week, it talks about the gender-based analysis. We think provinces, who are the ones who are putting the price on pollution, they should take into account the impacts of putting a price on pollution to everyone, to women, to marginalized groups, and they can do that through rebates and through other means. But it's very good that we're having this discussion in the House of Commons and actually looking at the impact of policies, including on women.
Well, member for Calgary-Nose Hill.
So now it's the province's responsibility to implement the intersectional gender-based sexist carbon tax? Look, I support asking questions on whether or not new policies, like new taxes, create barriers to equal opportunity. So, in that spirit, why is this Prime Minister set on implementing or forcing the provinces to implement a new tax that his own intersectional gender lens, gender-based analysis, said could make life harder for women?
Environment.
The purpose of doing a gender-based analysis is basically every policy can have a disproportionate impact on different groups. So we actually did this. I would encourage the member opposite to review Schedule 2 to the report. Yes, provinces are the ones who are putting a price on pollution. In fact, 80% of Canadians live in a province where they put a price on pollution. Provinces have the opportunity to take the revenues and to give them back to people. They can give money back to women, they can give money back to disadvantaged groups, they can give money back to farmers. It is up to provinces. We are giving them the tools and the information they need.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg, Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, yesterday I asked the Minister a question, but I don't think he understood. I'll restart. In 2010, the Harper government appointed a special advisor to the Privy Council office for matters dealing with human trafficking and illegal migration, but this advisor retired in 2016. Since then, the position has remained unfilled. My question's not about the G7 and the topics to be raised there. I'm asking, when can we expect this position filled again?
Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, we have taken a broader approach We have, in fact, embedded these issues with respect to human trafficking in a broad range of federal government policies at the G7, but beyond the G7. Indeed, in the last budget, one very useful initiative that had been asked for a very long time by a variety of women's organizations, the establishment of a national hotline for dealing with human trafficking. We are proceeding step by step by step on an effective plan to deal with human trafficking, and it's proving to be effective.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Haute-Saint-Charles. We'll come back to it next week because I want to know if someone is going to take the place of that former official. Now, Mr. Speaker, we found out that officials from the Canadian government went to Nigeria to discuss the visa process with the Americans. It's clear that Nigerians continue to receive these visas and enter Canada illegally. Knowing that they obtain visas only to enter Canada illegally, it's clear that the Prime Minister is finally realizing that there's a problem at the border. Is the Prime Minister ready to set up a system to have them immediately deported? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. To the Minister of Immigration. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As you know, our government is committed to protecting the security and safety of Canadians and at the border. We've invested a great deal in the last budget to process claims, contrary to the previous government that cut into border services. I can tell you that we are certainly discussing things with our American counterparts, and when it comes to the Nigerian community crossing at the border, we will continue to work with our American counterparts, and there have been real steps taken on that situation.
The Honourable Member for Abitibi-Témiscamingue. Mr. Speaker, the end of terrestrial television is having an impact on my region. Not only is there no longer a regional news show on Radio-Canada, but everyone who used to watch that channel via terrestrial television has lost access to it unless they're willing to pay for cable or satellite TV. This is happening in rural areas all across Canada. Mr. Speaker, can the Minister of Heritage tell us her position on the phasing out of terrestrial television in rural Canada?
Please.
The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Of course, we believe in the importance of our public broadcaster, and that's why we've invested over $600 million in Radio-Canada and CBC to ensure that we have good local journalism and also that we can gradually shift to other platforms as well. I understand the issues here, but this is managed by the CRTC, which is independent of the government. Furthermore, when it comes to telecommunications infrastructure, we invested $500 million to ensure that we would have broadband internet all across the regions of Quebec and Canada. The Honourable Member for Drummond. Mr. Speaker, obvious French grammar mistakes continue to be found on government websites, and this problem seems to be getting worse. This time, it's the Parks Canada and Revenue Canada websites, which are full of poor translations. An example, well, imagine you want to go to the park this year. The opening hours are listed as July 1st to 7th the 4th. It's appalling. The French language is not the language of Google Translate. It's an official language and needs to be respected. The Minister of Public Services and Procurement had promised to fix the problem, so what is she waiting for? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, of course we are committed to restore the important role of the Translation Bureau. We've made significant investments in the Translation Bureau, and we have appointed a we've appointed a quality control CEO, and we have worked with academic students and others to ensure that there are sufficient translators to take over. Of course, French or English language mistakes on government websites are unacceptable. We are committed to fixing them, and that's what we're doing.
Etobicoke Lakeshore. Mr. Speaker, Portugal was one of the very first countries to ratify CETA agreement last November. CETA was an important step in our bilateral relations, providing great opportunities for businesses and workers in both countries. This morning, as part of the state visit, our Prime Minister and the Portuguese Prime Minister are attending the Economic Club of Canada Summit entitled Canada-Portugal Economic Relations, Maximizing the Benefits of CETA. Can the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of International Trade tell us a little bit more about the benefits of CETA for our two great countries? Obrigado, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
I would like to thank the member from Etobicoke Lakeshore for his great question. Canada and Portugal are long-standing friends and allies and important commercial partners, and CETA marks an important new chapter in our relationship. With the increased market access from CETA, our exports to Portugal have already increased by over 40%. We are very grateful for the support and leadership Portugal has shown. With CETA, Canadian companies, especially in sectors like oilseeds, aircraft, and cereals, are benefiting. Mr. Speaker, this historic progressive trade agreement is creating opportunity for the middle class today.
Honourable member for Barrie Innisfil.
Well, when it comes to the issue of electoral reform, Canadians shouldn't have an ounce of trust in Liberals doing the right thing. Anyone remember that 2015 was going to be the last election under first past the post? Well, that lasted about a year or so until Canadians realized the Liberals were trying to rig the election system in their favour. Mr. Speaker, why is it every time that the Liberal Party wants to change things for the better, it ends up being better for them?
Here, here.
The Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Democratic Institutions.
Mr. Speaker, we're committed to strengthening Canada's democratic institutions and increasing Canada's trust and participation in our democratic processes. C-76 is a great example of that. This bill will increase the transparency of our electoral process. It will make elections more accessible to all Canadians. It will make the electoral process more secure and ensure political parties protect Canadians' privacy. We believe that a whole-of-government approach is required to protect Canada's democratic institutions, and we look forward to working with all members in the House to build a more open and transparent system for Canada.
For Barrie Innisfil.
Well, last election, nearly 1 million incorrect voter information cards were mailed out. The Liberals now want those to be used as proof of address. Outside foreign influencers funneled millions of dollars into Canada last election and, as an assault on our democracy. They've left the door open for the same thing to happen in 2019. Liberal operatives can organize to verbally vouch for individuals with no ID and allow their vote to count. Mr. Speaker, why is the Prime Minister ripping democracy out of the hands of Canadians and giving it to foreigners and Liberal operatives?
Here, here.
Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, the main challenge for our electoral democracy isn't voter fraud, but voter participation. Eliminating the voter ID card does not improve the integrity of the system. It only takes away the ability of many qualified voters to vote. In Bill C-76, we're not only restoring the use of voter identification cards and vouching, but we're also giving back the mandate for Elections Canada to promote participation. The Conservative Party's so-called Fair Elections Act was simply cover for a government determined to wring political gain from every measure. Mr. Speaker, we'll take no lessons from the party opposite. We believe Canadians have a right to vote, and that's what we'll continue to fight for.
Honourable member for Kitchener-Conestoga.
Mr. Speaker, we know that the Liberal carbon tax will raise fuel costs by over 10 cents per litre. For a farmer in Kitchener-Conestoga, that means an additional $6,000 a year just for this carbon tax. Add to that the cost of getting his feed to his farm and getting his milk to market. These costs will be devastating. Mr. Speaker, why is the Liberal government patting their books on the back of the farmers in my riding of Kitchener-Conestoga?
Honourable Minister of Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to be very clear to Canadians that we have committed that all revenues will be returned to the province. And in the province of Ontario, there is a price on pollution, as there is in Alberta, BC, Ontario, Quebec. 80% of Canadians live in a jurisdiction where there's a price on pollution, and guess what? They're the fastest growing economies in the country while reducing our emissions. Isn't that what we should all want? Shouldn't we all want that we tackle climate change for our kids, that we should also grow our economy and create jobs? And I wish the party opposite would understand you can do both.
Honourable member for Medicine Hat, Cardston Warner.
Mr. Speaker, communities in New Brunswick are currently experiencing record flooding, with water levels expected to continue to rise in southern regions of the province over the coming days. Families along the St. John River have been forced to leave their homes, and dozens of roads have been closed, leaving others cut off and in need of assistance. Now, my question, Mr. Speaker, is to the Minister of Public Safety, and I don't want him to blow another gasket with this question. Will you please update this House, sir, on what the government measures will be to assist those affected with the New Brunswick flooding?
Well, I appreciate the honourable member for Medicine Hat, Cardston Warner. It was polite in saying sir, I suppose, but he shouldn't be saying you, of course, unless he's referring to the Speaker. We address the Chair, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, to the Minister of Fisheries.
Mr. Speaker, our thoughts are with the people affected by flooding and with the first responders who are working hard to keep them safe.
Initial estimates of damages are in the $24 million range. However, this could increase should the water hit forecasted levels in the upcoming days. I'm happy to report to the House that since being asked, the Canadian Coast Guard has actually worked throughout the night to help people in this horrible situation. Our government always stands ready to help the province or territory requesting federal assistance in response to natural disasters, including flooding. The Prime Minister has also offered to provide military assistance to the province if they request it.
Honourable member for Saskatoon West.
Mr. Speaker, it's been 1 year since STC was shut down, and the people of Saskatchewan are still without access to safe, affordable public transportation. After saying they would work with me to address this issue in a meaningful way, the silence from this government is deafening. I hope the minister was sincere when he said he would work with me. When will the minister break the silence and get to work and find solutions for the public transit crisis in Saskatchewan?
Yeah.
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Transport.
I'd like to thank the honourable member for her question. We understand that having an efficient and functional transportation system is absolutely critical. We need to work together. We have to work together with the provinces and with the municipalities in order to make that happen, and those kind of discussions are underway. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Desnethi, Missinippi, Churchill
Mr.
River.
Speaker, perhaps the minister doesn't understand that there is no public transportation in northern Saskatchewan. This means that many women, seniors, and residents, including First Nations and Matey, cannot safely get to medical appointments or other critical services. Some can't even get to a grocery store. This is unacceptable. When will the minister start working with First Nations, Matey, and rural communities to provide them with safe transit?
The Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member knows, of course, that the decision to cancel the Saskatchewan Transportation Company and to eliminate that service across Saskatchewan was a decision taken by the provincial government. The federal government has infrastructure programming available to support transit services and facilities. The Government of Canada does not actually operate the bus system, but the Government of Canada can invest in the physical assets that are required to support the bus system. There would need to be a proponent in Saskatchewan willing to bring forward that proposition.
Honourable member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Mr. Speaker, my palliative care bill passed into law last year. As part of that law, the health minister is required to meet with the provinces to determine the services to be covered, appropriate training for the different levels of service provision, and to get input on a plan to get consistent access to palliative care for all Canadians. Since the law passed, the term palliative care was removed from the 2018 budget. So why is the minister dragging her feet on this very important issue?
Well, Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we recognize that Canadians want to stay independent as long as possible, and if they need services, they want to receive them within their home. In addition to the Canada Health transfer payments, we've invested more than $6 billion to provinces and territories to ensure that better home care and palliative care services are in place. We recently announced $6 million to Pallium Canada to increase capacity to deliver palliative care to communities. And also, I look forward to working with provinces and territories as we move forward in the implementation of Bill C-277, as we certainly want to make sure that the provisions of the bill are put in place. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Kamloops Thompson Caribou.
Mr. Speaker, after lengthy court battles, Charmaine Stick finally won the right to see her band's financial information, Onion Creek. The vast majority of bands publish this information freely. However, this government has enabled the rest to hide their books. As Charmaine said, quote, "Now that we have the numbers, our leaders are going to have to start answering tough questions." That's what it should be, communities that are empowered. Why is this government continuing to be complicit in this cover-up?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Indigenous Services.
Mr. Speaker, everyone, including First Nation governments, support transparency and accountability. We held 27 engagement sessions from coast to coast and heard clearly from First Nations that top-down solutions do not work. We are moving forward with the co-development of a mutual accountability framework, which was a recommendation from the new fiscal relationship report that was developed with AFN. Mutual transparency and accountability will only be improved by working in true partnership with First Nations.
Honourable member for Beauport, Limoilou. Mr. Speaker, on April 6th, the Ministers for Finance, International Trade, and Families, Children and Social Development visited the Port of Quebec. I was very pleased about that because since 2015, port authorities there have been working on a huge economic project for this region called Beauport 2020. For 3 years now, the Liberal government has been dragging its feet when it comes to approving this project or disbursing the $60 million that had been earmarked for this project by the previous Conservative government. So I would like the Minister to tell me, did you discuss Beauport 2020 with the port authorities, and what was the nature of those discussions? Thank you. I would remind the member to direct his comments through the chair. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Transport.
Member for the question. I do not have the specific answer of that particular project, but I know that the Minister, if you would give me a minute, the Minister has been in contact. There is a port authority review that is ongoing at the present time, so I know the Minister is very involved in this discussion as we move forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member knows that I will give members 35 seconds and not give them a minute, but I don't think she was actually meaning to talk to me when she said you, which she ought to be doing if she's using the word you, so I'd ask her to direct her comments to the chair. The honourable member for New Brunswick Southwest.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The flooding in New Brunswick is unprecedented. This week, I've been very involved, as always, talking with my constituents, but also the Minister of Fisheries, EMO officials, mayors and volunteers about this flooding. Would the Minister please inform this House how our government will help New Brunswickers in my riding of New Brunswick Southwest impacted by this unprecedented flooding? Thank you.
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to start by thanking the Honourable Member from New Brunswick Southwest for an important question. Our thoughts are with the people of New Brunswick, and we offer all support that we can during this challenging time. That's why yesterday, at the request of the government of New Brunswick, the Canadian Coast Guard committed to assisting the flood relief effort across the province. In addition to boats and personnel, the Coast Guard will help residents safeguard their homes against potential damage. The safety and security of New Brunswickers is a priority for our government, in fact, all members of this House, and we are committed to doing everything we can to support New Brunswickers during this difficult time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well done.
L'honorable député de Montmagny.
The Honourable Member for Montmagny, Lille, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister said during the election campaign that his budget would balance itself. Once they came to power, the Minister of National Revenue thought that giving $1 billion to public servants would help recover $25 billion, but that didn't happen. But a Nova Scotia sculptor named Steve Higgins has been hit with a $14,000 bill because the CRA considers his work to be just a hobby. After targeting single mothers and people with disabilities, why are the Liberals now trying to balance the budget on the backs of honest citizens like Mr. Higgins?
National Revenue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Canadian artists are among the most talented in the world, and we will work with our art partners to support them in their work. As my colleague opposite knows very well, I cannot comment on specific cases. The rules surrounding what is considered a hobby or a business are defined in the Income Tax Act, the test for which has been defined by the Supreme Court in 2002. We are committed to working with artists and stakeholders from the arts community to ensure that they have the tools and information needed to understand their tax obligations. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Châteauguay-Lacolle. Mr. Speaker, we live in a world where women living in poverty must face shocking inequalities from cradle to grave. Access to education, jobs, property, responsibilities. Women are far from enjoying the same advantages as men. Can the Minister of International Development and the Francophonie tell this House how our feminist international assistance policy is making a difference for women in developing countries? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my colleague for Châteauguay-Lacolle for her support of women's issues. With our feminist assistance policy, we are helping to end poverty and support women and girls by supporting local organizations, by funding education, and by reducing the barriers that are preventing teenagers from going to school. We want to give them access to all sexual and reproductive healthcare services and putting women and girls to work. That will make our world fairer and more inclusive.
Niagara West.
Mr. Speaker, Canadian companies are waiting on this Liberal government to do something on TPP. They know that being one of the first of the agreement
will give them a head start on selling their high-quality products to a market of 500 million consumers. The Prime Minister has given no timeline on the ratification. Mr. Speaker, can the Liberals tell us when we will see legislation so that Canadian companies can start taking advantage of this great Conservative negotiated agreement?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of International Trade.
Bien sûr, la ratification.
Of course, the ratification of the TPP is a priority for our government. The Minister was very pleased to sign the agreement on March 8th. Now that it's been signed, every member country will commence their own ratification and implementation processes. As you know, this must go through the normal legislative process before being ratified. I'm looking forward to working with my dear colleague on this legislative project.
Member for Central Nova.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Speaker, earlier this year, the Prime Minister, as Minister of Youth, launched a study on youth in Canada.
Update this House on the progress of the youth policy and how other young people can get involved.
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my honourable colleague from Central Nova for his very important question. As you know, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister firmly believes that youth are not just leaders of tomorrow, but they're the leaders of today. And that's why the for youth, by youth approach that we've taken to the creation of the first ever youth policy for Canada is proof of just that. And we've had an opportunity to speak with thousands of youth from all across the country about the issues that matter most to them, Mr. Speaker, but we always want to reach out to more. Et c'est pour cette raison, Monsieur le Président.
And that's why, Mr. Speaker, I encourage all members of this House to encourage young people in their ridings to visit the website youthaction.ca to give their feedback. Honourable Member for Joliette. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Competition Bureau spoke to the media and responded to our request for an investigation into gas price fixing. They talked about a plot and asked Canadians to send them evidence. Mr. Speaker, when the authorities start asking for the public's help, it's clear that we need a real investigation. Yesterday, the Parliamentary Secretary said that he would just monitor the situation, while we are asking the Minister to just do his job and order an investigation. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleague for his question. The price of gas is a concern for me and for all Canadians. We are determined to ensure that the price that consumers pay is the result of a fair competitive market. When the Competition Bureau notices such behavior that goes against the Competition Act, they do not hesitate to take action to protect consumers. Mr. Speaker, the Competition Bureau, as an independent organization, ensures that consumers can prosper in a competitive market. The Honourable Member for Joliette. Only the Minister has the power to order an investigation, and that's what we're calling on him to do. Oil executives aren't worried that the price of gas will ruin their holiday this summer. Quite the contrary. Esso's profits grew 55% year over year. Valero, 27%. Suncor, 22%. Meanwhile, and just in time for Saint-Jean-Baptiste Day, Quebecers will again be facing a bad surprise at the pumps. So I call the government to side with ordinary people for once instead of the oil companies. Is that too much to ask? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government does not have jurisdiction directly over gas prices. Only the provinces and territories have that authority. The Competition Bureau will take steps if there is proof of anti-competitive behavior. Following an investigation, 15 companies and several individuals were accused in the past of having participated in a gas price fixing plot in 4 regions of Quebec. Some of them have pled guilty or have been convicted and have been fined. The Honourable Member for Repentigny. The Prime Minister didn't care at all about Quebec's opinion about legalizing cannabis. Nor did the Prime Minister care about imposing a date for implementing new home-growing rules. Mr. Speaker, the same goes for health transfers, Netflix privileges, tax havens, and so much more. In the end, open federalism just means that Quebec has to bend to the will of the Prime Minister. Will his answer to Quebec's requests always be fuddle-duddle? The Honourable Minister of Health. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The health and safety of Canadians is a priority for our government. Cannabis sold today is not regulated, it's not tested, and it's often very dangerous. Bill C-45 will create a regulated market for all Canadians. We are taking the time to do this properly so that profits do not go to crime and our youth are protected. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Tabling of documents. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pursuant to Standing Order 36, bracket 8, I have the honour to table in both official languages the government's responses to 19 petitions.
Dépôt de projet de loi émanant du gouvernement.
Introduction of government bills.
Déclaration.
Statements by ministers.
Rapport de délégation.
Reports from interparliamentary delegations.
Reports from committees. The Honourable Member for Hamilton West and Castor Dundas. Order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pursuant to Standing Order 104 and 114, I have the honour to present in both official languages the 61st report of the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs regarding the membership of committees of the House. If the House gives its consent, I intend to move concurrence in the 61st report later today.
The Honourable Member for Etobicoke Lakeshore.
Speaker, I have the honour to present in both official languages the 9th report of the Standing Committee on Natural Resources entitled Value-Added Products in Canada Forest Sector, Cultivating Innovation for a Competitive Bioeconomy. Pursuant to Standing Order 109, the committee requests that the government table a comprehensive response to this report. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Introduction of private members' bills. First reading of Senate public bills. Motions. The Honourable Member for Hamilton West and Castor Dundas.
Mr. Speaker, if the House gives its consent, I move that the 61st report of the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs presented to the House earlier today be concurred in.
The Honourable Member have the unanimous consent of the House to propose the motion. Agreed. The House has heard the terms of the motion. Is it the pleasure of the House to adopt the motion? Carried. Presenting petitions, présentation de pétitions. The Honourable Member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a petition here from my riding talking about the Canada Summer Jobs Program and calling on the Prime Minister to defend the freedoms of conscience, thought and belief by withdrawing the attestation requirement for applicants to the Canada Summer Jobs Program. It's the duty of the Government of Canada to defend the rights of all Canadians, regardless of whether the current Liberal government agrees with their specific views. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Député de Jonquière.
The Honourable Member for Jonquière. Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have the honour to rise today to present a petition signed by people from Jonquière dealing with the GIS. The federal government recently announced a process for automatic registry for seniors for the supplement, but it will not apply to all eligible people when they turn 64. The program is important and enables seniors who receive old age security and who have a low income to count on this additional income and to remain in their homes and to benefit from more services they need. That's why this petition is so important. It deals with the guaranteed income supplement. I would remind honourable members that in presenting petitions, whether they are not to speak to whether they are in favour or against, they are just to present a petition.
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Standing Order 36, I rise today to table a petition regarding the former Bill C-51. Although the petitioners are from Southern Ontario and not from my immediate riding of Ottawa South, I am tabling this petition on their behalf. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for North Okanagan-Shuswap.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to present a petition today received from members of the North Okanagan-Shuswap and also across BC, asking that the petitioners calling upon Parliament to remove the condition of employers to attest to respecting reproductive rights of abortion within the Canada Summer Jobs Program. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Member for Courtenay Alberni.
Sure. I'm rising
again to table a petition on behalf of constituents from coastal British Columbia calling on the government to develop a national strategy to combat plastics entering our waterways. The petitioners are calling on the government to put forward a strategy to regulate single-use plastics, stormwater outfalls and microplastic pollution, a national strategy to clean up derelict and ghost fishing gear, extend producer responsibility, funding for education, outreach and beach cleanups, and of course, Mr. Speaker, to address the root problem, redesigning the plastic economy.
The Honourable Member for Pontiac. Mr. Speaker, I have the honour to present a petition to the House today for constituents interested in protecting the Gatineau Park. The Gatineau Park is one of the most visited parks in the country. There are some 90 plant species, 50 species of animals. The limits of the park aren't acknowledged under federal legislation, so the petitioners are urging the House of Commons to adopt legislation to give the park the necessary protection for future generations.
This petition on their behalf. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Niagara West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have two different sets of petitions here, all from my riding. It says, we, the undersigned citizens and the residents of Canada, draw the attention of the Right Honourable Prime Minister to the following. Section 2 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms identifies, among other things, freedom of conscience, freedom of thought, and freedom of belief as fundamental freedoms. And it goes on to ask them to look at the Canada Summer Jobs program as it relates to freedoms of conscience, thought, and belief. Thank you very much.
The Honourable Member for Niagara West made a good catch. The Honourable Member for Nanaimo Ladysmith.
Because of the risk to sport fishing, to tourism, the risk of an oil spill on sensitive shoreline, particularly on Sandwell Provincial Park and Whalebone Beach, which is in Nanaimo territory, I commend to this House yet more petitions opposed to the establishment of 5 new bulk anchorages off Gabriola Island, which is also my home. Petitioners from Calgary, Surrey, Red Deer, Gabriola Island, the province of Quebec, across the country urging the Transport Minister to cancel the bulk anchorages establishment at a time of unprecedented new anchorage traffic from these huge ships in the Salish Sea. We do not want to add to more of the risk and more of the load. Thank you.
Battleford Lloydminster.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to table a petition signed by my constituents in Battleford Lloydminster who feel that their Canadian Charter rights have been breached. The petitioners are calling upon the Prime Minister to withdraw the discriminatory attestation requirement from the Canada Summer Jobs program. They want the Prime Minister to defend and respect their fundamental freedoms of conscience, thought, and belief. Thank you.
Drummond.
The Honourable Member for Drummond. Mr. Speaker, I have the honour to table today a petition, an electronic petition with some 1,400 signatories, confirming that whereas free society is important, we, the undersigned residents of Canada, urge the government to, number 1, exempt books from the GST, restore a postal tariff for books, and 3, establish a personal tax credit applicable to the purchasing of books.
Honourable Member for Kitchener-Conestoga.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have a petition signed by many residents of Kitchener-Conestoga and the surrounding regions in the Waterloo region. They point out that the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms identifies freedom of conscience, freedom of thought, and freedom of belief as fundamental freedoms, and they're calling on the House of Commons to defend the freedoms of conscience, thought, and belief, and withdraw the attestation requirement for applicants to the Canada Summer Jobs program. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honour to rise this afternoon to present a petition from residents throughout Saanich Gulf Islands calling on the government to protect the coast of British Columbia, not just the north coast. The petitioners call on the House of Commons to establish a permanent ban on crude oil tankers on the west coast of Canada to protect British Columbia's fisheries, tourism, coastal communities, and natural ecosystems along the entire coast. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Yorkton Melville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for saving the best till last. I have 3 separate petitions to present today on behalf of the wonderful constituents of Yorkton Melville. The first one, they want to draw to the House's attention that the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms identifies, among other things, freedom of conscience, freedom of thought, and freedom of belief as fundamental freedoms, and therefore they are calling upon this Prime Minister to defend the freedoms of conscious thought and belief and withdraw the attestation requirement for applications to the Canada Summer Jobs Program. Secondly, I have a petition here from members of my riding as well as across Saskatchewan and Manitoba in regards to Bill C-71. They feel that this does nothing to tackle firearms violence, but rather adds further red tape to law-abiding gun owners and brings back the useless and ineffective long gun registry. It does not provide the resources to frontline police forces to tackle the true source of firearms violence, gangs, and organized criminals. So we, the undersigned residents of Canada, call upon the House of Commons to scrap Bill C-71 and act to amend certain acts and regulations in relation to firearms and to instead devote greater resources to policing in Canada. And finally, Mr. Speaker, these individuals indicate that a CBC documentary revealed that ultrasounds are being used in Canada to tell the sex of an unborn child so that expectant parents can choose to terminate the pregnancy if the unborn child is a girl. An Environics poll found that 92% of Canadians believe sex-selected pregnancy termination should be illegal. And the Society of Obstetricians and Gynecologists of Canada and the Canadian Association of Radiologists strongly oppose the non-medical use of fetal ultrasounds. These over 200 million girls are missing worldwide because of this practice, and the 3 deadliest words in the world are "it's a girl." Therefore, we, the undersigned, call upon the Canadian Parliament to condemn the discrimination against girls occurring through sex-selected pregnancy termination. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any petitions, présentes à la pétition. Questions on the order paper. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If a supplementary response to question 1564, originally tabled on May 3, 2018, and the government's responses to question 1568 to question 1583 could be made orders for return, these returns would be tabled immediately.
Pleasure of the House that the aforementioned questions be made orders for return, that they be tabled immediately. Agreed and so ordered. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Then furthermore, Mr. Speaker, I'd ask that all remaining questions be allowed to stand at this time, please.
Is it agreed? Agreed and so ordered. Ordre du jour.
Orders of the day, government bills, comments.
Of Bill C-48, the Oil Tanker Moratorium Act.
And now we're on to 5 minutes of questions and comments following the speech of the member for Courtenay Alberni. Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
So thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it's just to reinforce how important it is in terms of that there was a commitment that was made by the Prime Minister in the lead up to the election in terms of having a moratorium put into place. This legislation fulfills that particular commitment. But the government as a whole, in dealing with our natural resources and working with many different stakeholders, Indigenous people to provincial entities, has recognized how important it is that we move forward in terms of both economic development at the same time ensuring the interests of our environment. And my question to the member would the person not at the very least acknowledge that we can in fact do both at the same time, and that is indeed in the national interest.
We absolutely can. In fact, we're doing that right now where we live in coastal British Columbia. We have 100,000 jobs that are in tourism, that rely on clean oceans, that rely on a healthy environment. We as New Democrats, would like to see a transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy. We wished that this government would have pursued those same ambitious goals that they talked about in 2015 in their campaign. But, Madam Speaker, when we look at this bill, and I'll speak to that, the Prime Minister made a commitment. Crude oil supertankers just have no place on BC's north coast. I couldn't agree more. But, Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister seems to believe that they belong on BC's south coast. And there's no wall. There's no wall between the north coast and the south coast. The water doesn't go through a filter, anything like that. Our tides move. Our currents move. The wind moves water. Water moves. Our fish move. They migrate from the north to the south. Our whales migrate from the north to the south. There is no wall between the north and the south coast. We need to protect our coast. So I wish this legislation expanded beyond the North Coast and included the South Coast, and it was bold to protect coastal waters. There was an oil spill, Madam Speaker, off of the coast of Washington State, and that oil spill ended up on the west coast of Vancouver Island. That's how far it traveled. This is a small oil spill. So when we talk about the environment and the economy, yes, we can do both, but we don't need super tankers moving crude oil to protect the environment and grow the economy.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Cowichan, Malahat, Langford.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I really appreciate my colleague from Courtney Alberni and his speech. He really is a strong defender, not only for his riding, but really for what we on coastal British Columbia feel. You know, it's really odd being in this House because we have the Conservatives and the Liberals both trying to out-pipeline each other. And here we are standing in the face of stark evidence of what climate change is currently doing to our planet and what it's about to do. And we acknowledge that there are economic opportunities in moving towards a just transition. I know my colleague talked about that, but I just really want him to highlight, when we're talking about the national interest, can he just really emphasize what our coastal economy is really based on and what the potential is for the future when we take that forward-looking view, bringing in First Nations, bringing in economic tourism, the sport fishing, wrapping that up all together for a really clear vision of what we want to see on the coast going on through this century.
Member for Courtney Alberni.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I belong to a Chamber of Commerce that went from 160 members to 330 members. I belonged to a Chamber of Commerce that did that. And in fact, I was the executive director of that Chamber of Commerce for 5 years. So I watched the economy grow, and that economy grew with really great foundational principles of a community that was had core values that were based on protection of the environment while growing the economy and working with reconciliation. These jobs rely on a clean environment. And when we think about our oceans and the national interest, it's in the national interest that we have a clean, healthy ocean. Whether you live in Regina or Newfoundland, and trust me, Madam Speaker, we have had people come and move to our community from every province in this country and work in our communities and enjoy the beautiful environment we have. And most of those people, not just most, almost all of them, will tell you after leaving a place like Tofino that we shouldn't be increasing tanker traffic on the coast of British Columbia, Madam Speaker, and that's in our national interest. Protecting our economy, growing a sustainable, healthy economy, a marine-based economy that relies on clean ecosystems, sensitive ecosystems.
Resuming debate, the member for Cloverdale-Langley City.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity today to join in the discussion about Bill C-48 and the important role that it will play in the protection of the province that I represent in British Columbia. Bill C-48, an act to establish an oil tanker moratorium on British Columbia's north coast, is a significant step that we're taking to enhance environmental protections for our coastlines. Preventing accidents from occurring in the first place is our primary goal. This measure, which complements the $1.5 billion Oceans Protection Plan, takes a precautionary approach to help safeguard the extremely ecologically sensitive marine environment in this region. The BC oil tanker moratorium will build on the existing voluntary tanker exclusion zone, which has been in effect since 1985. The voluntary tanker exclusion zone ensures that loaded tankers carrying oil from Valdez, Alaska to U.S. West Coast ports transit west of the tanker exclusion zone boundary to protect our shoreline. By formalizing an oil tanker moratorium, this legislation will prohibit tankers carrying large shipments of crude or persistent oils from stopping, loading, and unloading at ports and marine installations in northern British Columbia. The moratorium area will extend from the Canada-US border in the north down to the point on British Columbia's mainland adjacent to the northern tip of Vancouver Island, and also includes the beautiful islands that are Haida Gwaii. The legislation also includes strong penalty provisions for contravention that could reach up to $5 million. This will help keep our waters and coasts safe and clean for use today while protecting them for future generations. Mr. Speaker, through this legislation, we will put in place unprecedented levels of environmental protections for the marine environment in northern British Columbia. The precautionary approach taken in Bill C-48 targets both crude oil and persistent oil products that are likely to remain longest in the environment if spilled. Under the Act, the Governor and Council will have authority to amend the schedule of prohibited persistent oil products. Amendments to the schedule would be done via regulation and could be considered following a review that would assess new science and evidence around the fate and behavior of the petroleum product when spilled, advances in cleanup technology, and institutional arrangements for responding to vessel source oil spills. Indeed, environmental safety and science will be the main considerations for adding products to the schedule or removing products from it. During consultations and witness statements, we heard about the importance of environmental protections in this region. Coastal communities and industries rely on healthy ecosystems to protect their way of life and livelihoods, for example, through fish populations that could become threatened should a serious spill occur in this region. The moratorium will protect the livelihoods of communities on British Columbia's north coast by providing a heightened level of environmental protection while continuing to allow for community and industry resupply by small tanker. Mr. Speaker, Bill C-48 demonstrates that we do not support large shipments of crude oil or persistent oil products in this region. The British Columbia oil tanker moratorium will take a preventative approach to oil spills in the region so that Canada's coastal habitats, ecosystems, and marine species, including marine mammals, are able to thrive. In addition to establishing the moratorium, we're also taking steps through the Oceans Protection Plan to improve our incident prevention and response regime and address environmental concerns in the event of a marine accident. The role and authority of the Canadian Coast Guard is being strengthened to ensure rapid and efficient responses in case of a marine incident. The Canadian Coast Guard will offer training to Indigenous communities for search and rescue, environmental response, and incident command to allow for a greater role in marine safety in their community. We're implementing the incident command system and enhancing emergency coordination centres across the government in order to bolster our response capabilities. These measures will improve the coordination of response actions of departments and agencies when dealing with an incident by using a common response system. During the response to larger pollution incidents, our government quickly brings together relevant subject matter experts in the field of environmental protection who supply consolidated scientific and technical advice on environmental concerns, priorities, and spill countermeasure strategies. This ultimately enables an effective and timely response to pollution incidents. Clearly, Mr. Speaker, the oil tanker moratorium is just one of many initiatives in our comprehensive plan to protect the marine environment. The Oceans Protection Plan, which is the largest investment ever made in our oceans and waterways, and the Oil Tanker Moratorium Act are two concrete actions we are taking to ensure a clean and vibrant marine environment. These measures reinforce our determination to advance science and utilize valuable traditional knowledge to keep our waters and wildlife clean, safe, and healthy for generations to come. This is why, Mr. Speaker, we hope we can expect the support of the members present for the passage of this bill, which moves this critical agenda an important step forward in protecting our pristine environment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Battleford Lloydminster.
Mr. Speaker, I will be sharing my time with the member for Beauport-Limoilou. Mr. Speaker, I stand in the House today to speak to Bill C-48, the Oil Tanker Moratorium Act, a bill that is yet another disappointment for all Canadians who want to see our country prosper. The Liberals may want Canadians to believe that this moratorium is in their interest, but that is just not the case. This legislation isn't justified by an environmental or economic study, nor is it supported by proper consultation with the impacted communities, industries, and experts. Rather, the legislation we have before us today is the fulfillment of political will, and its economic impact goes far beyond the prescribed geographical area in the legislation. In considering C-48, we must look at the full picture. The proposed moratorium is yet another hit to Canada's oil and gas sector. A sector that has already lost $80 billion in investment under this Prime Minister, under this Prime Minister's watch. That is the biggest decline in Canadian energy investment in 70 years. And just last week, Canadians found out that this Prime Minister's government gave taxpayer money to an environmental lobby group to hire an activist to protest against the Trans Mountain Pipeline project. A pipeline project that is supported by their environmental assessment and that they've told Canadians they support. Canadians deserve a government that is upfront with them, a government that doesn't undermine their prosperity. Championing Canada's energy sector should be common sense. The responsible development of our natural resources is essential to our country's prosperity. It is our second biggest export and provides tremendous economic opportunity. In fact, it employs hundreds of thousands of Canadians. It creates billions of dollars of tax revenue that benefits Canadians and communities across this country from coast to coast to coast. And we cannot dismiss the fact that oil produced